Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for October 20th through the 26th, 2024. Busy week as usual. However, there are a lot of things that I just don't have a lot of fidelity on and are just still uncertain, especially when it comes to what's going on right now in the Middle East. So this will probably be a little shorter than normal, but I'll hit the highlights and dig in as needed to some of the events that occurred throughout this week. Starting with the Northeast region, I did want to highlight the very brief 911 call center outage in Connecticut, mostly because these things tend to be part of daily life now. So again, 911 call center outages are becoming a lot more common than they used to be. This is for many reasons I can dig into later. However, it's going to be very, very hard for the layperson or somebody like me to figure out exactly what's going on. Again, a common theme throughout the past couple of years is this incompetence or is it malice? We don't know if this was a malign actor. We don't know if this was a cyber attack. We don't know if it was a exceptionally poorly written line of code that just got pushed out in an update, because everything is connected to the cloud nowadays. So even 911 call centers, which should be they're standalone systems, they're not really anymore. And things like this also tend to be prone to visits from the Good Idea Fairy. So this specific incident appears to be more innocent in nature, or at least that's what the authorities are claiming. Again, are they telling the truth? Who knows? There would literally be no way for any citizen to prove this was a cyber attack when the authorities are claiming that it was just some kind of poorly written code or some kind of update that crashed everything. But again, this is just another reminder that 911 services are a lot more fragile than anyone could possibly imagine, and it's very lucky that any 911 call center functions throughout the United States on a day-to-day basis. So again, just a reminder to have alternate plans just in case 911 is not available, right? Moving down to the southeast region, the Hurricane Helene recovery efforts continue. Things have smoothed out quite a lot. It's actually been quite impressive to see how things have kind of smoothed out. A lot of the major effort has kind of moved on, and we're starting to see a lot more. Cargo is still being delivered. There's still a lot of volunteer groups out there doing great work, delivering supplies and things to those in need. Electricity is coming back online. There are still a lot of people without power, but for the most part, the recovery effort is going very well. When it comes to the federal response and a lot of the more hierarchical federal aid that's coming into the region, a lot of wires are getting crossed. Still, there's a little bit of discrepancy with what FEMA is actually doing and what their long-term plans are, because this is a long-term crisis. So again, I don't know how much FEMA is getting in the way and stopping things. Probably not very much. It seems to me like at the absolute most of the federal response has just been either apathetic or just non-existent. The whole militia rumors kind of story has calmed down. It is now fully debunked. It's not a problem. Anybody who's been kind of causing any problems, again, largely most of the problems that have existed throughout this entire crisis are personality based. They're not really indicative of a top-down, memo that's been sent out for the feds to treat locals like trash. That's not happening. It's mostly just personality based. Again, in this kind of highly decentralized and semi-random effort, a lot of times personalities kind of clash, and it takes a special set of conflict resolution skills to kind of make things go smoothly and grease some wheels. So again, you have to think big. A lot of people will have an interaction again, and they'll be outraged, or they'll take to social media about something, and you do a little bit of digging and find out, well, this is really just kind of a personality thing and not really a blanket policy. So again, I would very encourage everyone who may not be affected by this to think in terms of just wave top stuff. Like think very broadly, think very abstractly about what's going on here. Again, this is a very special disaster, which is why I'm making some lessons learned on it myself from the few things I can contribute that might help for next time. But largely, one of the best things that has come out of this crisis has been networking. People getting to know each other, people building contacts, starting getting phone numbers and names of people that can help if something like this were to occur next time. So again, this area, as horrific as this disaster has been, it's really it's going to be really good and set up for when something more serious happens at some point. So again, I'll get into that with the lessons learned, but I did want to highlight that right to start with. Now, kind of in the same vein, I did want to mention this in this region because this is a space thing, and Boeing's headquarters was moved to Virginia. So I'll mention it in the context of Virginia. Boeing's satellite exploded in orbit a few days ago, over last weekend. This was their Intelsat 33E, IS 33E. It was a communications satellite, and it just exploded. At least that's what Boeing says. It's a total loss. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to mention this is because everybody hears Boeing and immediately thinks, okay, well, it's just some kind of DEI hire or some kind of shoddy workmanship that caused this satellite to explode. And that may be. That actually may be the cause. Who knows? We'll probably never know because it's in pieces and orbiting the Earth now. However, I did want to mention this in the context of people immediately jumping to Boeing doing something wrong, when in actuality, some people like me are thinking, well, if China or Russia were to blow up a satellite in orbit, what would it look like? Would it look any different than this? If we were to get a report or something like that China had destroyed a satellite, what would that report look like? It would look exactly like this: a satellite mysteriously exploding in orbit with no indications of it happening ahead of time. So, is this what happened? I don't know. No one has said anything. I'm just raising the question, or raising the theory maybe, for more intelligent people to kind of dig into. But one of the very first things that I do when I hear about stuff in space that's like, whoa, that's a catastrophic failure or something like that, is I check Russian and Chinese space launches and see if they declared any sort of launch with regards to any sort of projectile that may have been used. Now, again, if we're talking about like laser-based systems or something like that, it's hard to say. Plus, there's also, now that we've gotten a lot more advanced spacecraft like the American X-37 series, they could have launched a kill vehicle into orbit months ago and just spent months getting it into position for an immediate strike, right? So, again, I don't know if this is what happened. There's no evidence to confirm that or even suggest that, other than the catastrophic failure, which is odd. You don't hear of satellites exploding in orbit that often. They normally just fail and re-enter orbit. However, I did want to mention it because if this were to be a kinetic strike on a satellite, this is what the report would look like. So when it happens for real, this is what it'll look like. Again, I don't think it was Russia or China. I don't have any evidence to the affirmative or to the negative on that. But again, Boeing did report that this particular satellite did have some issues keeping station or getting into its orbit. This is not a low Earth orbit satellite, so it's a very large satellite. It was meant for communications, so in this case, they wanted to set it up kind of like a global star satellite and have it geostationary, so it's going to be in an orbit much further away from the Earth so that it can match the Earth's rotation, geosynchronous orbit, right? So, it's hard to say. One of the main reasons why counter-satellite systems and targeting is so challenging is because, well, the satellites are going really fast. So by the time, an Elon Musk Starlink satellite goes over China, by the time that it appears on the horizon, tracks across the sky, and disappears across the horizon, we're talking just a few minutes here. So that doesn't give a whole lot of time for any kind of laser or radio targeting of any kind. Geosynchronous satellites a little bit less so, because they're going to be at a fixed point in the sky from our perspective, from the ground. So again, something to dig into if you have some time and try to figure out what happened here. But again, we're largely going to be relying on Boeing's word, basically, and they have a financial incentive to lie. However, they also have an incentive to say, it wasn't us, we didn't screw this up. So I guess we'll see how it shakes out over the next few weeks. My guess is they'll probably quietly release a report on it, and we'll get a little bit more fidelity on it as time goes on. Moving down to the southwest region, did briefly want to mention the flooding in Roswell. There was a flash flooding incident in Roswell, New Mexico, Again, something that is kind of out of the ordinary, and I didn't see a lot of people talk about it, so I did want to mention it. You don't necessarily think of flooding being a concern in the desert, except for people who live in the desert who know that flash floods occur, decently commonly, and in this case, a record amount of rainfall fell in Roswell. Almost 6 inches of rain fell in just a very short period of time, and it caused catastrophic flash flooding. So far, the death toll is at 2 people. Roswell's not that big of a town, and thankfully, most of the flooding was kind of confined to dry riverbeds and things like that. So thankfully, it wasn't too bad in terms of catastrophe, but there was a lot of damage. So again, here are some photographs of that damage. And switching gears to Texas, I wanted to mention the Houston helicopter crash. This was kind of a thing that circulated on social media for a little while, and it does point out the importance of NOTAMs, or Notice to Airmen, memorandums from the FAA. It turns out, even though people, like myself, might look at NOTAMs and any kind of temporary flight restriction or things like that, it turns out that a lot of pilots themselves don't actually monitor those changes. So in this case, a local radio tower, the bulbs went out. The bulbs went out up the tower, and they had filed a NOTAM saying, "Hey, we can't replace the bulbs for a couple of weeks." So the FAA said, "No problem. We'll issue an obstruction warning via a NOTAM." They did that, and a sightseeing helicopter apparently did not get that memo and flew right into it. So very catastrophic and graphic crash, took down the entire radio tower and killed all 4 people on board the helicopter. So very tragic incident. However, it is a reminder that you may not be planning for something like that, but if there's a tower near you, be advised, right? You never know when a very significant incident might occur. Granted, aviation incidents involving plane crashes or helicopter crashes are still comparatively rare, so there's that to consider. But if you know that there's an incident stacking up, if you see a similar thing happening, and like, hey, the lights are out at this radio tower, they issued a NOTAM for it, but I'd be willing to bet people aren't going to look that up. That might be something to keep in mind. So wrapping things up with the United States, let's move over to the Middle East. And as many of you know, I dropped the Wire report last night, yesterday evening, and about 5 minutes after that, Israel attacked Iran. So here's what we know so far. Most of it's sketchy, and personally I find a lot of it to be exceptionally suspicious. So I've tried to map out all of the places where I think the Israelis struck. There have been a lot of maps floating around on social media, and most of them aren't accurate. So these are the sites that I have decently been able to maybe find out. I don't even think that Israel struck all 5 of these locations. I think they just struck a few. So in the light of day, the initial battle damage assessment, or BDA, doesn't appear to be too substantial. So I don't think Israel did very much, to be honest. I think they struck a few sites. They did strike, I think, maybe a party headquarters in Tehran. Again, even that is hard to verify, but it would make sense. The strikes in Tehran were more confirmable than anywhere else, simply because it's a metropolitan center, right? So there's a lot of photographs of it. However, a lot of Israeli media themselves, in typical fashion, are providing footage and photographs of older strikes that occurred many years ago. So, or strikes that aren't even in Iran, like they're in Syria or someplace like that. So, again, hard to figure out what they actually hit, but it looks to me just very, very basic, highly unconfirmed data. It seems to me like they didn't hit very much. And you can kind of see this with regards to the timing. So, no, it seems very coincidental that it occurred just a few minutes after my Wire report. But again, my Wire report occurred just after the financial markets ended for the day and for the week. So, again, Israel is kind of sending us a message here, or they're giving a little bit of their hand away. Yeah, they want to blow up the Iranians, but they also want to keep some financial interests at heart, and they didn't want to tank the financial markets with that strike. So they did it after the markets closed for the week, so that by the time Monday comes around, the markets will be stable again. So yeah, again, it's hard to say, is Israel doing this as like a face-saving measure, or is this like a significant thing? I don't know. I can't really tell. There are indications that the Syrians and the Iranians themselves as well did engage some Israeli aircraft. How successfully, I don't know. Probably not very, to be honest. Um, ADA, or air defense artillery, in the Middle East tends to be very much a spray and pray kind of experience. So, hitting an Israeli jet with, air defense artillery kind of, gun emplacements is going to be almost impossible. Missiles, a lot more deadly, but again, the Israelis know where every missile is in the Middle East, so they could easily avoid them. But I don't know. It's hard to say. Israel hasn't claimed any losses, but they wouldn't claim any losses, so hard to say. The Iranians, of course, claim that they, shot down everybody, but does that? I mean, there's really no evidence to suggest they hit anyone or anything. So yeah, I don't really know what much more to say about this, other than everybody was kind of expecting this to kick off World War III. I mean, it's kind of a fizzly start to World War III, if you ask me. I would have expected the Israelis to strike a lot harder than they did, but they haven't. So is the start of a larger, longer campaign? Maybe. It could be. But you got to remember, the Israelis, the number one benefit they have is surprise. And that is a long flight. That is a long flight from Israel over Syria, or over Jordan, probably over Syria, because the Jordanians don't like to let the Israelis use their airspace anymore. So over Syria, over Iraq, and into Iran. That's a long flight, and it's not like it's not like in Gaza or Lebanon, right, where you can take off and then in 5 minutes you're over your target. Basically just take off, bank left, and drop your bombs. It's a whole lot different logistically than flying thousands of miles, right, in a fighter jet, which is not meant to, fly that far of a distance. But in any case, I'm sure the military strategic debate will continue. Either way, there will be strong opinions on either side. I don't know. I'm just an American taxpayer just trying to make it day by day, so I don't really care that much. But in terms of, is this a start of World War III going kinetic? Maybe, but it's going to be hard to say. I mean, I find it I'm personally very skeptical of Israel's ability to wage an expeditionary war like this, or a long-range bombing campaign. They just don't have the equipment. I mean, the U.S. could do it for them, but even then, we're stretching ourselves. So I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. But I think that, as serious as this is, I don't mean to cast. I don't mean to downplay it by any means, but I think that as serious as this situation is, there is no situation so serious as to where panicking will make it better. So no matter how bad a situation gets, no matter how dire or desperate a situation gets, panicking will not make it better. So just keeping a kind of a wave-top strategic view of things, looking at this heuristically, that's probably the better way of going about things. Now, all of that being said, here is one detail that was slightly concerning to me. So immediately after those strikes, or right in the time frame between first wave, second wave kind of airstrikes in Iran, one thing that did occur was a massive earthquake alert. Now, you can sign up for varying defensive alerts in Israel. Israel has some of the most highly technically advanced territorial defense sensor networks and population alert kind of things. Think of it as, when you get an emergency alert on your cell phone. Well, Israel has the same thing, but it's like a multi-tiered thing. It's they can tell you exactly where you're standing if you're in any danger. And almost at exactly the same time as these strikes were being reported, a massive earthquake triggered the system. So all these dots here, all of these little pins, were where people got earthquake alerts in northern Israel. And the alerts were substantial. So they were reporting a 4.9 magnitude earthquake in the region. And that's not insignificant. So a few hours later, the Israelis confirmed in heavy air quotes, the Israelis said, no, don't worry about it. It's a false alarm. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a controlled detonation of a Hezbollah weapons cache in southern Lebanon. So don't worry about it. You know, explosives set off earthquake sensors quite often, so don't worry about it. Well, here's the thing. I'm skeptical because of the scale. So yes, it is true that large explosions can set off or be detected as earthquakes, because you have to remember they're just seismic sensors, right? So a lot of times earthquake sensors are automated, and it takes a seismologist to go in there and say, oh, no, this wasn't an earthquake. You see this happen around military bases a lot when they're doing, bombing runs or controlled detonations or things like that. Even in the United States, a lot of mining, blasting, and things like that, it will register as a small earthquake. But I very strongly doubt the Israeli narrative on this one, and here's why. It initially came in as a 4.9 magnitude alert. So again, initial earthquake alerts are always, at least as far as I have seen, they're always the worst case. So anytime you see an earthquake alert go out, it's 4 point something magnitude, whatever, almost always it's walked back, because a seismologist looks at that and they say, no, it wasn't, but it was some kind of harmonic or something that made it detect loud, more significant than it was, so on and so forth. So 4.9 magnitude earthquakes, that's a pretty big earthquake. And that's where my suspicion comes in, because if we remember the Beirut explosion, remember that incident from a couple of years ago, where this warehouse of explosives detonated with an extreme force, right? It's one of the largest, recorded accidental explosions in human history. When that facility exploded in Beirut, think about where this is at. In Beirut, that facility exploded, and it triggered, or was detected as, that explosion was detected as anywhere from a 3.3 to 4.5 by varying seismic sensors in the region. So you're going to sit there and tell me that the Israelis did a controlled detonation of an explosive cache that was bigger than the Beirut explosion? I don't buy that at all, especially considering, look at where these sensors were tripped. Northern Israel. So you're going to tell me that 50 miles away from southern Lebanon all the way down here to some of these points in northern Israel is about 50 miles or so. So after 50 miles of distance, you're 50 miles away from this explosion, and it is still several orders of magnitude bigger than the Beirut explosion? Pardon me for being skeptical, but I don't believe that. Now, what was it? I don't know, but whatever it was pretty big. And I'm sorry I don't have any more information on it than that. It's just a hunch. Like, that is way too big. If it was like a 1.5 or something, I would buy it. 4.9 though? That's a pretty big blast, So, and timed exactly at the same time as the strikes in Iran, I don't buy that either. And here's why I don't buy that either. Now, this could go either way, so it's up for you to decide what your personal opinion is, I guess. There's two schools of thought. One, if you're doing a military campaign, you probably want to strike on multiple fronts at the same time as a confusion measure. So, basically, all of the the Hezbollah watchers who are watching the Israeli airfields, they're going to see all these jets take off, and 15 minutes goes by and no bombs have been dropped in Gaza and no bombs have been dropped in Lebanon. So the Hezbollah guys say, they're probably going to Iran. So that can occur. And if you're a military leader, what you probably want to do strategy-wise is strike the guys in Lebanon at the same time to keep their heads down, for one, and also because they probably got complacent and they know that if the entire Israeli Air Force, or a couple of wings maybe, are flying over Syria, then where are they not? They're not in Israel anymore. So Hezbollah might, I mean, you see this with insurgent groups all around the planet. As soon as the planes go away, they start moving, right? They start moving logistics around. So it would make sense for Israel to set up a kind of, explosive trap, so to speak, locate a tunnel or do like a World War One, undermining, mine underneath the enemy's positions kind of thing. And then as soon as the jets appear, Hezbollah starts moving around because they think that they're safe because Israeli jets are in Syria, or excuse me, Iran, blowing stuff up. Boom, you blow stuff up in Lebanon. That would make sense. So there's your sort of doctrinal evidence in the affirmative that this was in fact a controlled detonation. The other counter to that is Israel has a substantial amount, I would imagine, a substantial amount of seismic sensors all over northern Israel to prevent Hezbollah tunnels. So just like, the Great Escape, Steve McQueen kind of thing, right? Tunnel straight down 30 feet, right? To avoid any kind of acoustic sensors. Well, same thing happens in Israel today. It's most prevalent down in the southern part of along Rafah with the Egyptian border, but you still see the kind of tunnel detection things. So you don't want to blow up your microphones and cause problems for your own sensor network by conducting a controlled detonation that is so large it thinks it's an earthquake, So that's generally why you don't see that kind of thing. You don't want to have this many explosives in one place at one time. So again, maybe I'm all washed out. Maybe this is just a waste of time to think about. I don't know. But it really was intriguing to me that the story is, it was just a controlled det or some kind of targeting in Lebanon. We're not going to really talk about it. But the scale of it, man, the scale of this is just so big. Now, I'll address it because, well, I think that the natural next line of thinking is, was this a nuclear test? Maybe, but I don't know. We'll find out eventually. Somebody's going to figure that out. I very strongly doubt it, though. I mean, I can't imagine Israel conducting a nuclear test in northern Israel. If any place, why would they do it there? Why not just do it in the Indian Ocean like everybody thinks they did last time? Why? Why do it there? I don't know. It wouldn't make any sense. But I'm just saying that I have no solutions for this. I have no really good theories. I have no evidence. I just think it's sketchy. And I think we need to look into this a little bit more with independent sources that are not coming from the IDF kind of thing. And of course, the Lebanese media is, useless anyway, so really there's not a whole lot of data we can sink our teeth into that's actually trustworthy on this sort of thing. But in any case, interesting thing, very suspicious. I'm going to keep my eye on it and see what's going on here. But so it could be a case of Israel just unzip their fly and let us know about a new weapon system or a nuclear test. I don't know. I don't think so, simply because I find it is astronomically more likely for me to just be wrong than it is for me to be the first person to think about this. So, I don't know. The acoustic signature will definitely get out and we'll know what it was once you look at that acoustic signature. But for now, it's just something that I have kind of been thinking about all night. And I don't really have any good solutions for it. So, shifting over to what the Iranians are going to do, who knows? By the time this brief comes out, they may have already struck back. I don't know. I'm inclined to think Iran's probably not going to do anything. They may launch a few ballistic missiles again at, empty military bases like they are fond of doing. I don't know. It's hard to say. They may do the whole drone thing again and give Israel like 4 hours of warning ahead of time. I don't know. It's going to be very hard, again, for these two countries, geography-wise, to target each other directly in more than just trading missiles back and forth. They can do that for a few weeks, but they're not on each other's border, right? So, I mean, granted, you could say that Iran is on Israel's border with the Syrian camps along the Syrian border, but I don't really count that. There's not a whole lot of large-scale ballistic military hardware there. So, I don't know. I just find it very hard to imagine a protracted conflict between Israel and Iran that is going to be like a knockdown, drag-out fight. But they may trade missiles, they may trade drone strikes, they may bomb each other for a few weeks, but something's going to have to give at some point, just because geography. For all the modern technology and for all the new and horrific ways of waging war in the world, Mother Nature still has a say, and geography matters more than the smart bomb in many, many cases. So I guess we'll have to see how it shakes out. Hopefully this doesn't escalate into being too big of a problem in the long run, but I'm sure the United States will find a way to get involved somehow. So speaking of the United States getting involved, let's move over to Taiwan. And for once, we have some good news. Well, good news for the United States, not so good news for Taiwan, I think. And I mentioned this in yesterday's Wire because it had just come out. Bloomberg right now is the only one that I've seen talking about this, but TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, they announced that their factory in Phoenix, in Arizona, in the United States, has produced a positive yield. So let me break this down really, really simply. China wants to invade Taiwan and reunite Taiwan with the motherland, the homeland, right? Taiwan doesn't want that to happen. They want to be their independent country. China invading Taiwan militarily, very bad. Very bad for the United States, very bad for the world. Why? Because Taiwan makes a lot of computer chips there. They make most of the high-grade computer chips used by pretty much every smart device on the planet. Most of those high-grade chips are made in Taiwan. So, China blow up factory in Taiwan, no computer chips for the world. That's the general theory, at least. So, if you were Taiwanese or if you were American, what would you do? Well, you would take the speed approach and shoot the hostage. Take the factories out of the equation. Move the factories out of the war zone so that if China invades Taiwan and blows up a bunch of stuff in Taiwan, the factories are still okay. And that's exactly what's happened. So TSMC has moved or created a very large semiconductor manufacturing facility in Arizona. And they, for the first time, reported that they're producing more chips in Arizona than they are in Taiwan. So, what does that mean for the United States? Well, it's good for the United States because it means that if China blows up Taiwan, the world will still have a pretty good backup of the world economy of high-grade semiconductor chips will be a little bit more insulated from that, right? Allegedly. That is, if the United States isn't attacked at the same time by Chinese cruise missiles and long-range bombers. But again, it makes it less likely. So I'm inclined to think that a Chinese attack on Taiwan will probably also coincide with a Chinese attack on American territories in the Pacific, but that's just my own opinion. What does this mean for Taiwan, though? Well, this decreases the chance the United States might get involved because we're not going to be having the motive to be world police and stop the Chinese from halting the semiconductor supply for the world. But on the other hand, this increases the chance that China would invade Taiwan because now that the hostage is kind of out of the equation, or it's starting to be, China may feel that they can invade Taiwan and the international community won't react because, if Taiwan doesn't produce anything of value for the international community, at least in terms of computer chips, the international community might be less inclined. They have less motive to become involved. So again, this does two things, in my opinion. Taiwan moving their semiconductor production overseas for them, to the United States or even Europe. This decreases the chance that we might get involved to help them, but it increases the chance the attack might occur in the first place, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Now, for now, does this mean the threat of war is over? Oh no, not by a long shot. This is just a start. They still make a lot of chips in Taiwan. Taiwan makes a lot of high-grade electronics. So it's not like the threat is completely neutralized. If China invaded Taiwan, there would still be, to this day, even today, very, very severe impacts to the global economy and global trade and global logistics. And it would be a nightmare still. But thankfully, we're starting to move in the right direction and insulating the world economy of, Taiwanese goods, so that if China does militarily strike Taiwan, it won't be as bad as it was. So, again, sort of good news. Good news for the United States, not so good news for Taiwan, I don't think, but I guess we'll have to see how this works out, and if the factories in the United States become more of a thing. Now, again, American politics does get involved here, so there are some theories that state that, well, depending on how the American election goes, Taiwan might also be de-incentivized to have overseas factories. So they may want to move all their stuff here to the United States. I mean, they basically took a lot of the workers from the United States to go work in Taiwan anyway. So maybe we could bring that manufacturing here at home. There's also the argument that, well, depending on who becomes president, Taiwan might be disinclined to move a lot of their manufacturing out of Taiwan. It's all based on business. However, I think all parties involved generally think that this is less about overseas manufacturing and more about wartime readiness. So any deal or thing like that to do with specifically TSMC, that's going to be approached with the angle of it being a national defense issue and not a you're taking our jobs kind of issue. That's how I think most people in government on either side would approach this issue. So I don't think the election is going to change too much specifically with TSMC. It may with a bunch of other companies, but TSMC is kind of an important company. So they get treated a little bit different for now. And of course, we can reduce our reliance on TSMC by encouraging American development of semiconductor chips. So again, very interesting kind of development, but I did want to mention it because for once it seems to be like some good news, right? So finally, let's wrap things up with the GhostNet. Again, I was expecting solar weather to be garbage. It was not. Solar weather was really good, and I got a lot of propagation. Not so much here. I was working on some things with my personal radio, so this is all from WebSDR. But yeah, a lot of people talking about things, a lot of people talking about the election, so and all kinds of threats and big concerns with the election. So yeah, the GhostNet again working pretty good, doing a lot better than I expected it to. But I'll use this as an opportunity to kind of talk about some of the election stuff, since so many of you talked about it during the weekly net. We're getting close here. We're getting very, very, very close to the election, and in typical fashion, I've kind of run out of time. But I do want to talk about some of the last minute preparedness things that I'm doing in the context of what unrest may or may not occur on election day or from election day to inauguration day. There are a lot of theories, and no one has got a really good, clear look into the crystal ball of the future and to figure out what's going to happen. But regardless of that, there are some universal preparedness things you can do, or at least what I'm doing in the short term, just kind of a series of reminders. So I will be making a video on that with regards to some of the last minute things that I'm going to do before the election. Again, we're getting pretty close, so I got to get that out soon. So if you're trying to think more broadly with regards to this election and some of the things that might occur in the more long-term situation, I think that you would really, really be best served to figure out and look at what's happening in South Africa. Now, South Africa, the decline of South African society and civilization, much like Rhodesia, right, was it's largely economics. However, there are a lot of nuances there, and it's a very, very complicated conflict, I would say. It's definitely a conflict. And I think that in terms of a Western moral society going right down the tank, I think that South Africa is probably the closest example you can get to a European civilization collapsing largely at the behest of economics policies. There's also a racial element to it, but that gets really contentious to talk about. But in terms of capitalism, communism, what's going on in South Africa right now, it's very complicated, but it's got all the elements, right? So for those of you who want to do a little bit of research into South Africa, you should definitely do so in terms of how things got to where they are. But you should also take a look at what's going on day to day. So, and unfortunately, I think in the United States we have this this assumption that when we see something horrific in society, when you see a horrific crime being committed in the United States, or something going very badly, we look at this and think, oh my gosh, it can't possibly get any worse. South Africa proves it can. So, unfortunately, for my friends in South Africa, you guys know what the extreme limit of human degeneracy can be. So, I know it's kind of become kind of a meme at this point, but I always think of that scene from Sicario. I know relating to world events in terms of a fictional movie is not the best idea, but I still think of the scene where, at the end, where Benicio del Toro comes in and says, "Hey, you're not going to survive here because this is a world of wolves now," or something to that effect. I think the United States has a very hard time grasping that concept of just how serious things can be. And it's not things that you really want to talk about in polite, civilized company, to be sure. A lot of this stuff is not very pleasant, even for somebody like me who is kind of familiar with this sort of thing. We don't really tend to want to talk about it too much in mixed company, but I think it's important to consider, especially since we seem to be going the way of South Africa in many regards. So if you want a source for what's going on day by day in South Africa with regards to some of these more illuminating events, look no further than my friend on Twitter, K9 Reaper. I will link his social media below. He is doing his best to prevent his nation from collapsing and documenting it along the way. So I can't think of a more perfect example of a prepared citizen stepping more into a more active defense kind of role. Here in the United States, we're not quite there yet. But in South Africa, they are. So this is a very interesting thing to kind of keep your eye on. So please follow K9 Reaper on Twitter and X for the latest neat and morbidly fascinating tactics and techniques that are being used by the copper thieves in South Africa, and more generally, the kinds of things that might occur when your civilization or your society at large starts to fail. So, again, more to come on this later. I just wanted to give him a brief shout out because I think his work is pretty cool, and I think it's something that we in the United States definitely need to be prepared for. Same thing in Europe as well. Definitely something to consider. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Again, here are the sources. A lot of things developing, a lot of international incidents. I didn't touch on the BRICS summit just because I think what I wrote in the Wire this week probably kind of summarizes it as best I can. So, yeah, a lot of international things going on, a lot of suspicious stuff. I don't really have a lot of fidelity on, satellites exploding, earthquakes occurring, all kinds of crazy stuff this week. So, hopefully we'll be able to get some more information on it, and my strange obsessions and fixations on very tiny details will be alleviated somewhat. So again, that's all I've got for this week. Thank you guys all for watching. Thank you all for your support, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.